I'm sorry, Evan. Your leadership style just doesn't fit our direction anymore. The words came from Olivia Tran, the new president of Solstice Tech, and they cut sharper than any performance review ever had. But it wasn't the message that stung, it was the setting. Monday morning, full leadership meeting, 30 executives present, and she dropped it like an announcement about next quarter's marketing budget. No warning, no respect, just execution in front of everyone. My name is Evan Cross, 49. I'd been director of operations at Solstice Tech for over 6 years, until exactly 3 minutes ago. I didn't argue, didn't ask why, just closed my laptop with one smooth motion and said, "Understood." Olivia had been with the company less than 2 months, flown in from New York by our new investors who wanted a fresh vision for our Seattle-based firm. She brought buzzwords and high heels, not once stepping foot into the assembly line that powered our growth. As I packed my things, one box for personal effects, another for the binders I'd built across hundreds of late nights, I heard her footsteps behind me. "This isn't personal," she said gently. But it was. Because what they called outdated, my structure, my systems, was the very reason we'd grown from 6 million to 15 million in annual revenue. Not through flashy strategy decks, but through people, through trust, through remembering birthdays, fixing things before they broke, and always, always showing up. As I left, I shook hands with my team, wished them well. I meant it. On the drive home, I took a detour to Puget Sound, parked where the trees opened to the water. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be at 10:30 a.m. on a Monday. "Guess I'm free," I whispered, watching waves curl under a silver sky. Sometimes, the best part of being underestimated is what comes next. If this kind of story speaks to you, about quiet strength and earned redemption, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing. It helps us keep telling stories that matter. The messages started coming in before I even crossed the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. "Evan, what the hell happened? Just heard. Are you okay? Please tell me this is a mistake." Colleagues, vendors, old clients. Word travels fast in our industry, faster than any press release. I didn't respond. Just turned off the radio, rolled down the window, and let the cold spring air rush in. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I'd realized. 6 years of work gone in one sentence. But the strange thing was, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I took a left off the highway, drove through the quiet back roads lined with pine and cedar, and parked at one of my favorite lookouts over the Sound. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to just sit. The sun was struggling to break through the clouds, the water below calm, but always moving. I watched a barge pass slowly, cutting through the mist like it knew exactly where it was going. That used to be me. My job had never been about titles or office politics. It was about stability, knowing that shipments arrived when they should, that every factory line had what it needed. I built that rhythm, day by day, handshake by handshake. Now, that rhythm was broken. I closed my eyes. This wasn't failure. It was dislocation, a shift. And somewhere beneath the stillness, I felt something stir, like the tide turning deep below the surface. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't finished. I first walked into Solstice Tech when it was still just a converted shipping warehouse near the port of Tacoma. Bare cement floors, flickering lights, a production line held together with duct tape and desperation. The founder, Darren Lynn, was a brilliant engineer with zero sense of logistics. He pointed to a whiteboard so full of missed deadlines and shipping costs, looked like a war zone. "I need someone who can fix this," he said. "You military guys know how to move things. Make it work, and I'll make it worth your while." He wasn't wrong. After 15 years as a logistics officer in the Army, I didn't just understand systems. I understood people inside those systems. You can't strong-arm your way into reliable supply chains. You build them, brick by brick. I hit the road. That first year, I visited every critical supplier, drove through snow to meet a mother-daughter team running a precision plastics shop in Yakima, took red-eyes to Cincinnati to walk factory floors with production managers, not just to negotiate, but to listen. What were their bottlenecks, their worries, their margins? I asked. I remembered. I followed through. By year 3, Solstice had the most resilient supply chain in the region. When competitors shut down over chip shortages, we kept running. Our reliability hit 98%. Client retention soared. Darren used to laugh during reviews and say, "Whatever you're doing out there, Evan, don't stop." I didn't. I built a system where people trusted us because we trusted them first, where success wasn't flashy, but it was earned. And I thought that meant something. Until it didn't. The shift began quietly, almost politely. Darren announced he was selling, said he wanted to spend more time with his grandkids, maybe fix up his sailboat. I believed him. After everything we built together, he deserved that peace. But I also knew what came next. The buyers were a private equity group from Chicago, efficient, polished, focused on unlocking shareholder value. They moved quickly. New reporting structures, software overhauls, a wave of consultants with slide decks and zero context. And then came Olivia Tran. She walked in like she already owned the place. Designer heels on the production floor, all talk of agile reinvention and cost optimization opportunities. The kind of leadership that never once asks, "How did this system come to work in the first place?" Her second week in, she canceled my quarterly vendor trip. "Too expensive," she said, "in the digital age." Third week, I overheard her tell an analyst on the phone that operations is stuck in the past. We need new blood. By then, I had stopped defending myself in meetings. She wasn't listening. None of them were. They wanted transformation, not continuity. They thought stability came from software, not people. So I started copying my files, quietly, my contacts, my notes, my systems. I didn't know exactly when they'd cut me loose. I just knew they would. The moment it happened, publicly, deliberately. I knew it wasn't about performance. It was about symbolism. Olivia needed a message. And I was it. What she didn't understand, though, was that I'd already prepared for it. Not out of bitterness, out of pattern recognition. I'd seen this before, in uniform, in boardrooms. New leaders don't just bring vision, they bring disruption. Sometimes that's necessary. But sometimes they tear down the very structure that held everything together, just to prove they're in charge. So while she was crafting her narrative, I was backing up vendor records, documenting contract terms, organizing process maps no one else had asked for. There was no formal transition plan, because no one thought to request one. And now, they never would. Each supplier agreement I'd built over the years wasn't just paperwork. It was a relationship, a phone number, a face, a conversation over coffee in a small-town diner. Most of those contracts didn't auto-renew. I'd made sure of that. They were designed for annual renegotiation with me, not out of ego, out of accountability. Olivia had assumed she could cut me loose and keep the system intact. What she failed to grasp was that I was the system, and once removed, the foundation she was so eager to reinvent would begin to crumble. 3 days after I walked out of Solstice Tech, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Thomas Becker, chief engineer at Redmond Systems, one of our longest-standing clients. "Heard what happened," he said without preamble. "Their loss." "You free for lunch?" No agenda. Just two guys who'd built things the old-fashioned way, watching the new way burn it down. We met at a diner just off by 5. Thomas looked the same, graying beard, grease under his fingernails, hands that still knew how to rebuild a carburetor if needed. He wasn't a man for fluff. "So, what's next for Evan Cross?" he asked over black coffee and a rare steak. I shrugged. "Still figuring that out." He nodded slowly. "Well, you'll want to know. Solstice is already showing cracks, vendor delays, confusion. Heard they're implementing some shiny new vendor portal." He raised an eyebrow. "That you?" "Nope, never touched it. Every major supplier still had a direct line to me. No middle layer, no automation. Just people solving problems in real time." Thomas leaned in. "Figured as much. Listen, there's something you should hear. A friend of mine, Julia Winters, CEO over at Orion Instruments. They're scaling fast, but their operations are buckling. I told her about you." I blinked. That name wasn't just familiar. It was an open door. "She wants to meet," Thomas added. "Soon." As we parted ways in the parking lot, he gripped my shoulder. "Not everyone's forgotten how real work gets done, Evan." And in that moment, something old and steady returned. Not hope exactly. Something firmer. Purpose. Driving home from that lunch with Thomas, I felt a shift. Not a rush of vindication, but something colder. More precise. Olivia had made a fundamental miscalculation. She believed the systems I built could be detached from the man who built them. That a vendor portal could replace a relationship. That process maps could replace memory. That trust could be templated. But what she didn't know, what no one on that shiny new leadership team knew, was how intentionally I'd built the entire structure. Every major vendor contract required annual renegotiation. No auto-renewals, no standard terms, just handshakes, shared risk, and shared benefit. My name was on every dotted line, not for credit, but for accountability. They'd assumed continuity, but there was no continuity without connection. That evening, the first email came in, from Solstice, not from Olivia, from someone in purchasing. Subject line, "Urgent, contact info for Tacoma Precision." The note was brief. Their rep had refused to continue discussions unless I was present. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Harold Lynn, our old founder, then Julia Winters, then 3 other people who tried to hire me over the years. By Friday, I had 4 strong offers, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like something had been taken from me. I felt like I was holding the map. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. Orion Instruments wasn't just a job. It was a challenge that felt eerily familiar. Rapid growth, fragile systems, a company held together by duct tape and willpower. Julia Winters, their CEO, didn't waste time. "We don't just want what you did at Solstice," she told me during our final meeting. "We need it, only better. And if you can deliver, there's equity in it." I said yes. Day 1, I skipped the welcome emails and started on the floor. Met the line supervisors, the night shift leads, the people who made the machines work and had no time for buzzwords. By day 3, the picture was clear. Inconsistent deliveries, quality lapses from overseas vendors, and inventory practices that looked like guesswork. But nothing I hadn't seen before. Nothing I couldn't fix. That Friday, my personal phone buzzed. Olivia Lang. Her name sat on the screen like a ghost. I let it go to voicemail. Evan, hope you're doing well. We're experiencing some unexpected supplier issues. Wondering if you'd be open to a brief consultation. Compensated, of course. I didn't answer. Monday, my assistant forwarded an email. General inbox, urgent request, from Olivia again. I deleted it. By Wednesday, she was calling every few hours. By Thursday, she showed up in Orion's lobby. Reception followed my standing instructions. No Iron Veil visitors, no exceptions. I watched on the security feed as Olivia waited. Her posture perfect, her expression slowly unraveling. The first crack in her armor. And I hadn't lifted a finger. That afternoon, I received an encrypted email from Brian Cho, my former assistant at Solstice Tech. We'd stayed in touch after my departure. Quiet check-ins, no gossip, just mutual respect. The subject line was simple. Update from the inside. I opened it slowly, scanning each line. Total chaos, he wrote. Tacoma Precision just raised rates by 18% on the new contract. Apex Coatings delayed shipment by 5 weeks. Atriomix won't return calls. 3 vendors, 3 red flags. Brian continued, leadership scrambling. 4 emergency meetings this week alone. Olivia's blaming vendor resentment. Says you poisoned the well. I leaned back, absorbing the absurdity. I hadn't contacted a single supplier. Hadn't asked anyone to retaliate. I didn't need to. They saw what happened. They watched someone who'd built trust for 6 years be dismissed like a line item. Suppliers aren't algorithms. They're people. People who remember how you made them feel when things got tight. I stared out my office window at the Orion loading dock below, where components were arriving on time, unloaded by workers who knew they'd be heard if something went wrong. Olivia thought she was dealing with spreadsheets. But what she dismantled wasn't a system. It was a web of loyalty. And once broken, the kind of thing doesn't snap back. It unravels. The next morning, I got a call from Harold Lynn. He still held a minority stake in Solstice Tech, even after the sale. The voice on the line was gravelly, tired. The board's asking questions, he said. Olivia's blaming vendor hostility for everything. Claims you sabotaged the company on your way out. I let out a quiet breath. I haven't spoken to a single Solstice vendor since I left. I believe you, Harold said. But she's built a convincing story. Says you burned bridges. There was a pause. Then his voice dropped lower. They lost the Delta Max contract yesterday. Couldn't commit to delivery dates. I closed my eyes. Delta Max. I'd spent 3 years building that relationship. Late-night calls, site visits, working through 2 product redesigns. One of our biggest clients. Gone. Not my concern anymore, I said. Of course not, Harold agreed. How's the new gig? Different challenges, similar mistakes to fix. I hesitated. I might need more production capacity soon. Know anyone looking to sublease space? Harold chuckled softly. Funny you should ask. I might have some leverage to help with that. Very soon. The tone in his voice had shifted. No longer just a concerned former owner. Something more calculating. We were both watching Solstice spiral. But now, the question wasn't if it would fall. It was who would catch the pieces. A week later, a letter from Solstice Tech's legal department arrived in my inbox. Allegations of breaching non-solicitation agreements. Claims I'd interfered with vendor relationships. Thinly veiled threats of litigation. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Julia's legal team with a simple note. For your review. Their response came back the same afternoon. No merit, no evidence, no concern. They were right. I hadn't contacted anyone. I hadn't lured vendors, hadn't whispered in boardrooms. I had simply stepped aside and let the consequences unfold. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I no longer needed to defend myself. A month into my role at Orion Instruments, I got a short message from someone unexpected. Eleanor Hayes, head of finance at Solstice. We'd worked together closely in the past, two people who cared more about outcomes than office politics. Her message was brief. "Can we meet?" We chose a small cafe near downtown. She looked tired, not just physically, but in the way people do when they've been holding everything together while watching it fall apart. "They're blaming you for everything," she said quietly. "Delays, cancellations, lost clients. Olivia's convinced you sabotaged the company." I stirred my coffee. Would have taken more than 10 minutes' notice to plan sabotage. Eleanor gave a faint smile, then leaned in. "She didn't fire you for your leadership style, Evan. She fired you because you were the only one who would have pushed back." And suddenly, it all clicked. That meeting wasn't just an execution. It was a warning. Eleanor slid her tablet across the table. A spreadsheet glowed on the screen. Columns of numbers, margin targets, cost reductions. "They need to cut 12% from the supply chain in the next 2 quarters, she said. "Non-negotiable." I scanned the figures. It wasn't just ambitious, it was reckless. "They'll have to gut quality or move production overseas to hit that," I muttered. She nodded. "Which means months of disruption, and Solstice's reputation won't survive it." I leaned back, trying to absorb the scale of it. "This isn't about modernizing," I said. "It's about flipping the company." "Exactly," Eleanor replied. "Olivia was brought in to prep for a quick exit. The investors won out within 18 months, and you were the only obstacle. That was why the termination had been so public. Not a dismissal, an example. Most of us didn't know what was coming," she admitted. "By the time we realized, you were already gone, and no one else had the power or the nerve to question the plan." I exhaled slowly. "Why tell me this now?" She hesitated, then reached for her coffee. "Because I resigned yesterday. And there's a board meeting next week. They're considering shutting down the Everett facility. 200 jobs." I stared at her. "Harold won't let that happen. They're pressuring him to sell the rest of his shares," she said quietly, "and making it very hard to say no." I stood with her outside the cafe as she unlocked her car. "Thanks for telling me." She paused, then looked back. "They're going to burn it all down, Evan. Unless someone stops them." I drove straight to Harold's house. Found him in the garage, elbow deep in the guts of an old Triumph motorcycle, hands greasy, expression focused. "They're going to gut Solstice," I told him, laying out everything Eleanor had shared. Margin demands, facility closures, investor pressure. He didn't say a word at first. Just wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the workbench. "I've been feeling the squeeze," he admitted. "Lawyers called daily, trying to get me to sell my last shares, offering 10% below market." "Don't," I said, sharper than I meant to. "Easy for you to say. You're not getting hammered by them every morning." "What if," I asked carefully, "there was another way?" He raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "What if Orion acquired Solstice instead? Julia's expanding. She needs manufacturing space. Solstice has the infrastructure, the talent, just not the leadership." Harold stared at me, long and hard. "You're serious?" "She'd need your help brokering it. Quietly. Present yourself as a concerned founder, an outside party with a lifeline." He paced once across the garage. "The current investors wouldn't sell to Orion. Not directly. Too much ego. But they might, I said, if the numbers get worse. If Solstice is hemorrhaging and a fire sale is the only option. Harold studied me for a beat, then smiled, small, grim. Colin Drake, you strategic bastard. Nothing unethical, I said calmly. Just reading the market. Purely hypothetical, he replied, nodding. But we both knew exactly what we were doing. That night, I drafted the email. Subject: acquisition opportunity. Confidential. I laid it out for Julia with precision. Solstice's collapsing vendor relationships, the production inefficiencies, the potential value of their customer list and existing infrastructure. I framed it not as revenge, but as strategy. This isn't about taking something, I wrote. It's about salvaging what still works and protecting the people doing the real work. Julia replied in under an hour. If we move fast. The next morning, I focused fully on Orion. We streamlined inventory protocols, cut waste by 12%, and rebuilt trust with every major supplier. Our floor supervisors started sending thank you emails. Clients returned with renewed confidence. Meanwhile, Solstice was unraveling exactly as predicted. Brian texted midweek. 3 more clients suspended orders. Production's limping along at 40%. First round of layoffs hit today. I forwarded the update to Julia. She didn't respond with words, just a calendar invite titled, Acquisition Discussion, Friday. That Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed. Thomas Becker, my old friend at Redmond Systems, stood in Orion's lobby with a paper bag full of deli sandwiches. "You've got a minute?" he said. It wasn't a question. We sat in the break room, the kind where whiteboards never get erased and someone always burns the coffee. "We're pulling out of Solstice," he said between bites. "Can't depend on them anymore." I nodded slowly. "Sorry to hear it." He studied me. "We'd rather work with someone who understands reliability. Someone like Orion." I paused. This wasn't just a contract offer. This was leverage. Thomas didn't dance around it. If Orion can supply the components Redmond needs, we're prepared to sign a 3-year contract. High volume, priority terms, no drama. I sat back, letting the weight of it settle. We didn't currently produce the same parts Solstice did, but with the right tooling and lead time, we could. And if we did, it wouldn't just be a new revenue stream. It would make Orion's bid to acquire Solstice even more compelling, a guaranteed customer base waiting on the other side of the deal. "I'll take it to Julia," I said, "but this changes things." That evening, I outlined the offer and included Brian's latest updates. More vendor withdrawals, internal staff tensions, missed shipments. Solstice was bleeding, and the industry was watching. Julia's response came within the hour. "Make them an offer," she said, "but go through Harold first. Let's test how desperate they really are." Harold agreed without hesitation. He reached out to the investor group as a concerned former owner, claiming he'd found a private party interested in acquiring the company discreetly. When he called me back, his voice was low and clipped. "They bid immediately. Barely negotiated. They won out. Fast." Did they ask who the buyer was? Of course. I told them it was a private capital firm with strategic manufacturing interests. He paused. "They didn't press. They're too focused on stopping the bleeding." The window had opened, and we were already through it. Everything moved quickly after that. Julia assembled the acquisition team, and I provided the roadmap. Asset lists, vendor relationships, operational strengths worth preserving. We weren't there to gut the company. We were there to rescue what still had value. 2 weeks later, the meeting was set. Monday morning, Solstice headquarters, exactly 3 months to the day since I'd been fired. I chose my suit carefully, not to impress Olivia, but to respect the weight of the moment. This wasn't about vindication. This was about restoration. At 9 a.m. sharp, I stepped into the Solstice conference room, flanked by Julia and her legal team. Harold sat at the far end, composed. Olivia looked up, stunned, then visibly rattled. "What is this?" she snapped, glancing between us. Harold's voice was calm. "Mr. Cross is representing the acquiring party." Her chair scraped back as she stood. "We're not selling to him." But one of the investors, Pearson, sharp suit, tired eyes, cleared his throat. "The agreement is already in place. Orion Instruments will assume Solstice's operational assets. Mr. Cross will oversee integration." "You can't be serious," Olivia hissed. "He sabotaged our relationships." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. "I haven't contacted a single vendor since the day I left. I can provide emails, call logs, sworn statements if you'd like." "Then how do you explain what you're experiencing?" I said evenly, "is what happens when partnerships are reduced to transactions. People don't stay loyal to systems. They stay loyal to those who respect them." Julia stepped in. "We'll retain the Solstice brand and as many staff as viable. Harold will keep his stake. Your services, however, won't be required." Olivia didn't argue. She just gathered her things and left. Later that afternoon, just as I was reviewing the final integration charts in my office, Maya, the front desk coordinator, knocked lightly on my door. "She left this behind," Maya said, holding out a plain, unmarked envelope. Didn't say a word, just placed it on the table before walking out. My name was written on the front in tight, slanted handwriting. I waited until the office was quiet before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no signature, just 5 lines, handwritten. "I didn't understand what you built until it was gone. I was wrong to dismiss you the way I did. You deserved better. They wanted results, and I thought I could shortcut my way there. I hope you do better, for them and for yourself." There was no apology in the traditional sense. No justifications, no excuses. But the weight of those words. I folded the note once, neatly, and slipped it into the back of a drawer. I didn't mention it to Julia, or Harold, or anyone. Some things don't need to be shared. They just need to be read, once, in silence. Then put away.